Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Cross, and I will be your instructor for social work practice and process here at Howard University. This is the welcome introductory video to help prepare you for what's to come in the course outline. Up until now, in the course content folder, you should have access to your syllabus. You should be able to see your assignments on your syllabus as well as in Blackboard. You also should have this week a syllabus quiz. Some of you have probably already taken it. Congratulations. But the goal here in the first week is to get you settled in and acclimated to the course and the class environment. You should also be familiar with Blackboard by now, and hopefully you'll have more time throughout the week and the weekend to really search around, understand the functionality, and get prepared. I know I've received some emails from some students so far, so you're really getting to understand what the tools and the functions are. I encourage you to do it. You should also be in your groups. All the students are set up in groups, and these are for peer support. Many of you have already joined a virtual office hours that I have held already, and so we will continue to do that throughout the week. But as promised, this is an introductory video so you can learn a lot more about me, your instructor. And I like to not only just explain my background to you, but also probably use the required textbook and the chapters that you'll be covering to help discuss a little bit about myself. So I am a transplant to the DMV area from Philadelphia. I did most of my career as a professional clinical social work in Philadelphia. I received my bachelor's of social work from Temple University, my master's of social work from Temple University. I also have my MBA, my master's of business administration from Rosemont College, and I have a concentration with my MBA in healthcare administration. I also have my doctorate of social work, DSW, from University of Pennsylvania. So again, to tell you a little bit more about my practice background, I worked as a direct practitioner, a direct social worker, or social worker in direct practice for the first 2 years of my career at a nonprofit agency called, at the time it was called Housing, Philadelphians Concerned About Housing. It is now changed to Achievability, and it was a self-sufficiency program. And that program was to help single parents meet their self-sufficiency goals. And the self-sufficiency goals that we helped parents work on or families work on are education goals, housing goals, education, housing, budgeting and finance, family goals, as well as any personal challenges. We help them with those goals as well. And as a caseworker, I had a caseload of clients that I would go out to see weekly to make sure that they were moving along as necessary in their goals. That agency was funded as many nonprofits are. One of their funders were the United Way. And so I did that for a couple of years. And so this course that you're taking with me, Social Work Practice and Process, will help you as you embark upon your career as professional social workers. And I would like to talk about that. The first chapter you'll be reading this week is about introducing generalist practice, the generalist intervention model. You'll keep seeing my head turn to the right because I'm looking at the table of contents as I'm talking to you. But the generalist intervention model, it will be covered all throughout your book, and you will see it covered throughout the chapters of Christashman and Hall. So please make sure you get to know it and you familiarize yourself with it. The generalist intervention model is presented at the very start of this book. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it because I have another video that I uploaded already that talks about the chapter reviews. But the generalist intervention model is a broad model that we use in generalist practice, and it can be applied to your work with individuals, groups, and in communities and organizations. Think about the generalist intervention models as you're doing your work in the field with your clients and make sure you apply it. Consider how to use it and demonstrate knowledge in this course of the generalist intervention model. That model we did utilize in our social work practice and in our agency work at Achievability. Don't want to go too much into detail with it at this time, but just know that that is a practice model, that an intervention model that you can use across field in micro, meso, and macro practice. Chapter 2 of Kirstashman and Holz talks about social work with individuals and groups. And so a lot of times in my work at Achievability, we would do intake on clients. So clients would call and want to be a part of the program, and we would do telephone intakes over the phone with individuals. And we were allowed the opportunity to utilize the social work skills with individuals that's demonstrated in Chapter 2. Listening, conducting an interview. This was telephone interviews. And we also had to make sure that we were applying standards and ethics of social work practice, dignity and respect of the client, for example. Competency is another one, for example, in our contacts with clients. My caseload specifically were of single parent women who were in that were residing in homeless shelters, who were also involved in child welfare services. They were ready and completed their family service plan with child welfare, and the only thing that they needed to be reunified with their children would be housing. And so that's where our program came in. We were not a housing program, but we offered housing as a way of removing the barrier for self-sufficiency. So we would provide housing units. Some of them were apartment and some of them were houses to clients while they work on their self-sufficiency goals. And these were low-priced, affordable homes. These were homes that were oftentimes refurbished, so they were in essence brand new homes that were gutted out, developed specifically for the purpose of this program. And we also had a couple of apartment buildings too for clients, excuse me. We would use the housing developments for the larger families, and we would use the apartments for the smaller families. And so part of my work at Achievability was not only doing intakes over the phone, but we would also go to shelters and do interviews with clients to see if it was a good fit. So the goal of those interviews were, one, to educate the clients about the program so that they would know it wasn't just a housing program, but there were expectations. And they had to be committed to those self and want those self-sufficiency goals in order to apply for the program. The second part of the interview was to do an intake and answer any questions that they had. And again, the social work practice skills for working with individuals came very handy in those one-to-one dynamics with the client. Again, getting them acclimated to the services, having them comfortable, and then being able to demonstrate those professional social work skills to onboard and vet and sometimes filter clients for the program. As stated, because they were from marginalized, oppressed backgrounds, a lot of them, again, were rebuilding from histories of domestic violence that led them to a shelter, history of substance use that led them to shelter, and again, taking a strengths perspective and providing them with the opportunities to meet their full potential in life. And another part of the goals, the self-sufficiency goals, were working on personal challenges. So a lot of women were working on recovery, or a lot of women were healing from trauma. And so as a social worker practicing or generalist practicing social work, we had to address those needs and make sure we set up treatment plans or self-sufficiency plans for those particular clients to make sure that they stay on track with their sobriety goals, and as well as again learn how to those budgeting skills. So ultimately, when they finished the program, they were ready to either obtain their own apartment or hopefully purchase their own home. Educational goals varied for those clients as well. That could be working on their GED in high school, depending on where they were at in their education, or some of them were working on associate's degrees, and ultimately some were ready and preparing to enter into some type of undergraduate program. But again, the goal was to be a stable force in their life and a support for them so that they can then continue to grow. And so again, being able to apply appropriate social work ethics and standards and professional practice, value and dignity of the client meant a whole lot to those clients, and it helped us build a rapport and develop the relationship necessary, the professional relationship necessary to then impart on a plan with that particular family or that particular individual so that they can continue to grow. So we use a lot of those skills for working with individuals to develop those professional relationships, that trust, that positive regard and warmth and respect. And we use that relationship to help grow them in their self-sufficiency goals. And so, again, chapter 2 was very helpful in my work, specifically in that program with that initial contact with that client, but also developing the foundation for that relationship and the skills that I needed to help move that client along in terms of their self-sufficiency goals. Practice skills for working with groups, chapter 4. Chapter 3 in your textbook was very helpful to me in my work with that agency as well. Why? Because as part of their self-sufficiency goals, some of them had to attend different type of groups also for self-sufficiency. So if they had a domestic violence background, we had a domestic violence support group. If they had a substance use or substance abuse background, we had a recovery group there. We also had financial counseling skills group for those clients. We had parenting support groups and parenting skills groups. And so that came in handy. Chapter 3 became handy for us when we had to facilitate those groups. And as social workers, we had to rotate in which evenings we would work one evening a week. And in each of those evenings, there would be a group. So sometimes we were facilitating the groups ourselves or just managing the group, making sure the facilitator was there to develop. And again, these groups were along a continuum of care and support to help get the clients where they need to be. And so understanding group dynamics, understanding the composition of groups, how groups are made up of closed-ended versus open-ended groups, and the life cycle of groups, beginning, middle, and end, was very helpful in my work with clients. And you'll learn more about that in chapter 3. Chapter 4, skills for working with organizations and communities, is also helpful because we were a community-based agency, and the organization in which we worked had policies in which we had to understand. We also have to understand what the role of that agency is in the larger community. And so we were very heavily a community-based, community-driven agency, and we had to understand the dynamics of the community, understand where our clients were actually living, because that's where the houses were. We had them housed in the community, and as social workers or generalist social workers, we were actually walking into those communities to do our home visits, to check on clients and to give them the support that they need. And so that chapter, you'll learn a lot more about organizations. And so the expectation will also be for you to really understand your field agency as well, and then understand how that agency works. What's the structure of the agency? What is the composition of the agency? Is it social workers there? Is it interdisciplinary? Understanding the policies that govern the agency and the policies and the laws that govern a practice of social work in general. And again, understanding all the community resources, because even though we were a self-sufficiency program helping our clients out, we also oftentimes would use the other agencies, other community resources also to help clients, whether that be getting them connected to what we used to call the welfare office, but the Social Security office sometimes, also helping them with getting their benefits for Medicaid, understanding what hospitals were around for clients who needed care, knowing where intensive outpatient substance use programs were available for clients, understanding where if the agency or was located in a food desert. Again, understanding what resources, because the agency was pretty comprehensive, but we still needed the use of the community resources to help move the client forward. You'll have a community assessment paper in this course where you'll learn to assess a community, what the resources are in the community. Resources are the agencies, agencies, their programs, they're your parks, they're your schools. You'll also understand what the composition of that community is through census and other type of data searches for your community assessment paper. You'll also be interviewing key community informants to really understand the rich history of the community and the dynamics of that neighborhood and or community. So we have a paper that's going to help with that. And we also have an agency paper too, which is going to have you analyze an agency structure, your own agency that you're going to be placed at for field. And so chapter 4 on working with organizations and communities will be helpful in your write-up of your agency paper in your community-based paper. 5, engagement and assessment in generalist practice. I talked about that earlier in that we did a lot of intakes, and a lot of that was engaging with clients, not just at the start, but throughout the entire course. But usually that assessment phase in the early stages of your work with clients is where you're really going to build that relationship. And you have to decide what skills you're going to use, your listening, your observation skills, seeing verbal and nonverbal cues. How are you going to understand that and how that's going to inform the way you engage? Being mindful of the environment that you're in, that you're actually conducting the interview in, or the environment in which your client is from or used to living in, and how that informs how you engage with that client. You'll learn more about that again in chapter 5. Chapter 6 talks about planning and generalist practice. What does planning look like when you're doing planning for an agency? Macro planning, macro, meso, and micro individual planning with clients. For instance, we had self-sufficiency goals. That's what our planning looked like. And those goals would be around education, um, career development. It'll be around personal challenges if they were dealing with substance use, or and definitely education, planning around education. What were their goals? Where were they at, and where do they need to be for their goals? That's what planning looked like in that agency. But that agency also didn't plan on just the micro level with clients and their self-sufficiency goals, but we also planned in the meso, and that's looking at the agency itself, looking at the community as well, understanding what planning needed to happen in the community. Was it a safe space for clients to meet their self-sufficiency goals? Or was substance use that was going on in the community? Was it a high crime, high substance use area? And how did that put our clients at risk who were recovering from substance use? Planning oftentimes went around how to support their parenting and the goals that they have for themselves as parents, as a lot of them were being reunified with their children. But also planning on a macro level, what were some of the larger plans for development for the area? Were there parks, and were there need for parks? Were there need for schools? What was policing like in the area? And was there any type of intervention that needed to be done in the realm of the macro in terms of the overall development for the local community? Also, when you're thinking about planning, we also think about on the macro level, we're also thinking about state government and federal government as well. What type of programs were available at the state and government level to support these clients? And what type of state and government support financially did we have as an agency to carry out the mission and goals of our program? Chapter 7 gives you examples of implementation of generalist practice. So you'll delve a little bit deeper with more concrete examples of what it looks like, including the generalist intervention model. You'll also learn in Chapter 8 evaluation, termination, and follow-up skills that social workers use and engage in. We always were evaluating where the client was in their self-sufficiency goals. We were always evaluating how well how we as social workers were moving clients forward in those goals. Were we being instrumental in moving them? Were we actually progressing them toward their goals? Or there's some things that we need to look at in our own practice in which we needed to improve to better serve clients? And termination, when were clients complete, or were they allowed to continue to move on? And follow up was key in understanding that and knowing what termination looks like and how to terminate with clients. That's going to be important for you. And that again is chapter 8. And you'll need to understand that because as you're working with your clients in the field, you have to understand what follow up looks like, how to evaluate your work with those clients in the field, and then ultimately how to terminate. And if you understand some of the key concepts with termination, you start termination with clients at the very start. So that's letting them know when termination is, how many sessions they're going to get, how long you're going to continue to work with them. Your role as a student really dictate that you have a time limited um, opportunity to work with them, and they need to know that at the start. Chapter 9 and 10 is understanding families and family assessments and working with families. Again, the program that I worked in was a self-sufficiency program, and in order to be eligible for that program, you had to be a single parent. And so we were doing intakes and understanding what that family structure looked like and that assessment of that family. We wanted to know what the structure of the family is. You can use genome match for that. We also going to learn a lot about eco maps as well, understanding the community resources as well in your readings. But we needed to understand what the structure of the family is and what the dynamics were. If you can imagine, if it was a child that was in foster care that was being reunified, that may be some very challenging family dynamics in which that parent had to navigate, and you as a social worker has to support that parent in navigating. And so again, working with families will be covered in 9 and 10, but I use that the skills that you'll be learning in those chapters a lot in my work with that agency. Values, ethics, and resolution of ethical dilemmas. Values and ethics of social work will find itself through all your work with individuals, groups, families, agencies, organizations, and communities. So understanding what our social work values and ethics are, understanding what your own personal values and ethics are, but making sure that you in your work and your professional practice, you're utilizing your professional values always with clients is the key here. And you'll learn more about that in chapter 11. Chapter 12 and 13 talks about culturally competent practice and being sensitive to marginalized, oppressed populations. You're at the right institution for that, Howard University. We set the mark when it comes to cultural humility, cultural competence, and particularly with our Black perspective, which you learned a lot about at orientation. But again, understanding culturally competent social work practice with the population that you're working with. We worked in my program, we were working with a lot of African American or diverse women, but mainly African American women with very diverse backgrounds. But we did have some men who were single parents as well. But understanding and being sensitive to the gender dynamic, again, being a woman who has been in a domestic violence situation, working with her and engaging with her will look very differently. Excuse me, for the dog barking in the background. Um, Working culturally competent work will look very differently depending on the population that you're serving, whether it's women, men, people with substance abuse background, trauma backgrounds, mental health challenges, and so forth. So understanding what culturally competent practice and making sure that you're continuing to apply your values and ethics is key, particularly with underserved, marginalized populations. 14, you'll learn more about advocacy, brokering, for advocacy, 15, brokering and case management, and 16, recording and generalist social work practice. I won't go too much into it then, but a lot of the work that I was doing was social work services, but a lot of it was case management when I worked for Achievability. We were dealing with a lot of clients, and we considered them your caseload because you were comprehensively working on so many things. And each particular client and family had a different treatment plan, and so and a treatment plan to get them to self-sufficiency. So advocacy skills were key. Sometimes you're advocating for your client within your agency to make sure they get all the resources that they need. Sometimes you're advocating for them in their communities, in their organizations, with their employers. And so advocacy can look very in a lot of ways. Sometimes you're doing macro advocacy where you're encouraging clients to vote based on their values and their beliefs and what they want for themselves and their families. And brokering, really being that conduit of resources for clients, and making sure that you use an organized systemic way of managing your caseload, entering people in, moving them out, and making sure you're applying agency policy and expectations as well as macro policies, laws, statutes in your work with clients every day. That's pretty much it But that is my background, but it just doesn't stop with just that work. I just like to use that example because it does a good job introducing the textbook um, chapters to you, but it also gives me an opportunity to apply it in my background as I share it with you. The second part of my background you may be interested in is I'm a medical social worker. So I did work at that agency for a little while, and then I transitioned into a medical social worker, and I spent most of my career doing that. So over 20 years of experience as a social worker, and then I moved into academia. I sit on a couple of boards. The National Perinatal Association is one board. I also sit on the board of um, National Association of Perinatal Social Workers, NAPSW. I'm also the former president of the National Association of Perinatal Social Workers. I'm involved in a few agencies as well, National Association of Social Workers and the Council of Social Work Education. And as many of you know, I'm also in private practice, so I do mental health counseling for people who are in need. I see families, I see couples, I see um, um, individuals for a whole host of issues, depression, anxiety, and the gamut. And so that's a little bit about me. I hope that's helpful, and I hope now you get to know me a little bit more as a professor as we move through the courses. If you want to know any more, or if you have any more questions for me about my background, please let me know. I'm available, and I'm more than happy to talk about anything that, whether it's related to the coursework or just about my background. Also, my doctorate is a practice doctorate. It's a DSW. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about that, I'm also available for you as that to answer questions about that. And also I'm licensed in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and DC. So I have not a lot of knowledge and expertise in licensing. And if you want to pick my brain about that, you can as well. So I hope this welcome was good for you, a good way to introduce me to you and do a quick overview of your textbook and applying a lot of the overview of the textbook to that. So thank you. And I know there were some backgrounds going on, and because clearly I'm teaching from home, and so you may see some background movement and voices. I apologize for that, but it is what it is. So welcome to Social Work Practice and Process, and I look forward to having an exciting semester with you. Bye.